You have followed rules your entire life. From the moment you could walk, someone was already teaching you how to sit still. From the moment you could speak, someone was already warning you about what not to say. It seemed normal. Everyone around you was doing the same. But if you stop and think carefully, you may begin to notice something. Many of your decisions were not truly yours. They were shaped by something older, quieter, and more persuasive than logic. That thing is fear. It does not scream or rage. It does not need to. Fear only needs to suggest, gently, that something bad might happen if you do not obey. That suggestion lives in the back of your mind, silent but active. Over time, it becomes part of you. You do not speak up in class, not because you have nothing to say, but because you are afraid of being wrong. You do not question your manager, not because you agree, but because you fear the discomfort that comes with being difficult. You do not break away from the group, not because the group is right, but because standing alone feels dangerous. Fear appeal lives beneath your habits. It is in the warning tone of a parent, in the cold eyes of a teacher, in the public shame of a disobedient peer. It wears many faces, but its goal remains the same: to shape your behavior without ever touching your body, just your mind. Fear is praised as a guide, as a source of wisdom, as something that keeps you safe. But what if that is only half the truth? What if fear has been used, not to protect you, but to shape you into something easier to manage? Those who understand this tactic do not need to raise their voice. They only need to create the right consequence and wait. You will do the rest. You will silence yourself. You will avoid conflict. You will stay in line, even when no one is watching. This is not because you are weak. It is because you were trained. The training began early. It was wrapped in care, in structure, in warnings that sounded like love. And in the process, fear became a teacher you could never ignore. But obedience built on fear is not the same as understanding. It looks the same on the outside, but inside it leaves something behind. A tension, a quiet sense of surrender, a habit of shrinking before you speak. Many live their entire lives in that quiet obedience. They call it discipline, they call it respect, they call it maturity. But what if those labels were designed to hide the truth? This is where we begin, with that quiet, invisible weight sitting on your shoulders. The one that told you to stay small, stay polite, stay afraid. Let it rise to the surface. Let it be seen for what it truly is. A tool, not a truth. A tactic, not a principle. It has shaped more than you realize. And before this is over, you will see exactly how deep it goes. From the moment you began to understand words, a pattern was already forming. When you cried, they warned you. When you disobeyed, they scolded you. When you questioned too much, they lowered their voice and told you to be careful. Slowly something sank into your mind, deeper than any lesson about numbers or names. You were taught that fear keeps you safe. It was never explained, never discussed openly. It came packaged inside phrases like be careful, behave yourself, do not talk back. Over time, you absorbed the idea that fear was a signal of wisdom. If you feared something, it must be dangerous. If you feared someone, they must be right. If you felt afraid, the best thing to do was stay quiet, follow orders, and protect yourself. This belief grew roots in your thinking. It shaped your sense of right and wrong. It defined what felt normal. Fear became the quiet background noise of your daily life, like air conditioning that never turns off. You hardly noticed it, but it influenced everything. Fear appeal works best when it hides beneath the surface. It does not need to be loud or violent. It just needs to be predictable. The threat does not even have to happen. Your imagination will do most of the work. The possibility of rejection, punishment, or isolation is enough, and once your behavior shifts to avoid it, the tactic is complete. You were told that fear leads to protection. But what if that message was planted there on purpose? What if it was never about safety, but about control? This is where the illusion begins to crack, because fear can protect you from physical danger. That much is true. But psychological fear, fear of disapproval, fear of being wrong, Fear of breaking the pattern is not the same. It does not protect your body. It restrains your identity. And the more often you obey, under fear, the more natural it feels. You start believing that following the rules is part of being good. You start believing that questioning is selfish. You start believing that silence is maturity. And the real danger is this: you forget that you were trained to feel this way. This belief is passed on by people who were also trained. Parents who feared judgment, teachers who feared disorder, leaders who feared resistance. They teach what they know, and what they know is fear. The system does not need to be perfect. It just needs to keep working. A small dose of fear here, a rule there, and soon, a generation obeys without realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because they were never shown an alternative. This is the beginning of the dark secret, the part you were never told. Obedience built on fear is not a sign of wisdom. It is a sign of conditioning. Before we move deeper, take a moment. Think of one belief you hold, one behavior you repeat that may have come from fear rather than thought. Write it down, say it quietly, let it be seen for what it is. This journey is not about rebellion, it is about awareness, and awareness begins with seeing the lie. You do not need chains to control people. You only need the right fear, and today, those fears are everywhere, carefully placed, calculated, repeated until they feel like common sense. In school, students do not learn obedience through joy. They learn it through threat. A low grade, a public scolding, a red mark that signals failure. Children are not told to think for themselves. They are told to stay within the lines. They follow instructions, not because they understand, but because they do not want to be punished. In families, fear wears the mask of love. Parents believe they are protecting their children when they say, if you do not follow the rules, something bad will happen to you. Over time, love becomes confused with anxiety. A child begins to feel that love means fear, and that fear means love. In religion, fear is often institutionalized. The promise of salvation is paired with the threat of damnation. You are told that obedience is holy and disobedience is sinful, not because of the ideas themselves, but because of the fear attached to them. Eternal suffering, judgment, exile. These are not explanations, they are tools. Governments understand this principle better than most. Laws are not just guidelines, they come with consequences. Surveillance is not just for safety, it is also for control. A citizen who fears punishment will follow rules they never agreed to, and they will believe they are doing the right thing, because fear trains the conscience. Even in the workplace, fear appeal shapes behavior. Employees stay silent during meetings. They nod, agree, avoid eye contact. Not because they lack thoughts, but because they fear losing their position, their reputation, their livelihood. This fear makes them efficient. It makes them productive. It also makes them replaceable. Media plays its part too. Every headline, every alert, every breaking story is built to keep your nervous system on edge. You are not just informed, you are conditioned to expect danger, conditioned to accept authority, conditioned to obey the loudest voice in the room. This is not a conspiracy, it is a pattern. A system that rewards those who stay inside the boundaries and punishes those who step beyond. The result is a population that believes it is free, while moving through a carefully managed field of invisible limits. Fear appeal works because it is quiet. It does not ask for your attention. It shapes the space around you, so that obedience feels natural, and in this space, disobedience feels dangerous. You may think you are choosing, but how many of those choices were made because the alternative felt unsafe? As you move through your day, begin to notice the language around you, the warnings, the advice, the subtle threats. Begin to ask yourself, what would I do if fear was not involved? Because when fear becomes the reason behind your habits, your decisions stop belonging to you. Fear is not random. It is not chaotic. It follows a path inside the human mind that has been studied, tested, and repeated. When you look closely at how obedience forms, you begin to see that it is not based on truth, it is based on pressure. In the early 1960s, Stanley Milgram conducted a psychological experiment that would change how we understand authority. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person, simply because a man in a lab coat instructed them to do so. The shocks were not real, but the participants did not know that. They hesitated, they sweated, they questioned, but most of them still obeyed. They believed they were hurting someone, and they kept going, because an authority figure told them it was necessary. That moment revealed something unsettling. People will go against their conscience, their values, even their sense of reality, if they believe it is expected, especially when fear is present. It was not fear of violence that drove them, it was fear of disapproval, fear of looking weak, fear of resisting authority. This type of fear is subtle. It does not appear as panic, it appears as politeness. Solomon Asch showed something similar. In a series of experiments on conformity, participants were asked to match the length of lines. The task was simple, but when others in the group gave the wrong answer on purpose, many participants followed. Even when they clearly saw the truth, they ignored it, because going against the group felt too uncomfortable. That discomfort is not just social, it is biological. Your brain is wired to seek safety in numbers. It links rejection with danger. That is how obedience begins, not with violence but with the fear of standing alone. Over time, this fear becomes a structure. A person may no longer need pressure from others. They will pressure themselves. They will silence their own doubts. They will justify their own obedience, and they will believe they are being rational. This is the foundation of psychological control. You fear the consequences, so you obey, but you also fear the act of disobedience itself. You begin to think that obedience is a form of safety, even when it causes harm. And when everyone around you is doing the same, it does not look like fear, it looks like culture. This process is not limited to dramatic moments. It happens every day, in conversations where you nod but disagree, in choices you make because you feel watched, in silence you keep because you know what happens to those who speak too soon. This fear-based obedience is not natural, it is learned, it is reinforced, and it is designed to keep you in place, not for your benefit, but for the comfort of those in power. You were told that obeying is the right thing to do, but you were never told what that obedience costs you, or who profits from it. Power does not need to raise its voice when fear is already doing the work. Those who understand this principle do not rule with constant force. They rule with invisible presence, maintained by your own imagination. You expect consequences, so you stay quiet. That is the success of fear appeal. Control begins when fear is linked with identity. If you step out of line, you are not just punished, you are labeled. You are made into something undesirable, disobedient, disrespectful, difficult. These are not accusations of action. They are judgments of character, and they hurt more than fines or orders. In this way, fear becomes personal. It moves from the outside to the inside. You are no longer avoiding punishment. You are avoiding shame. You are avoiding rejection. You are avoiding becoming the wrong kind of person. Michel Foucault described this in his analysis of the Panopticon, a prison design where one guard could observe many inmates from a central tower, without the inmates knowing when they were being watched. The brilliance of this design was not in surveillance itself, but in the uncertainty it created. The possibility of being observed at any time was enough to make prisoners behave as if they were always being watched. That same logic now lives in classrooms, offices, streets, and screens. It is not necessary to be punished. It is enough to believe that you might be. And when fear appeal is consistent enough, your behavior adjusts permanently. You learn to manage your image. You perform correctness. You repeat opinions that feel safe. You stay close to the center, not because you believe it is right, but because it feels less risky. Leaders, institutions, and systems understand this. They do not need to dominate you every day. They only need to create a few clear examples, a few rules, a few consequences, a few public corrections. The rest will unfold on its own. And when others around you comply, the pressure grows. Now disobedience feels not only unsafe, but lonely. That loneliness becomes a second layer of fear, and in time, the system policies itself. Power maintained through fear does not rely on weapons. It relies on perception. It relies on your willingness to surrender control before anything happens. You imagine the cost, and that imagination is enough to stop you. This is the full effect of fear appeal. It does not simply guide your actions. It sculpts your thoughts. It creates a reality where obedience seems logical, even natural, but that reality was built, and like any construction, it can be questioned. Power is never only about structure. It is about emotion, and the strongest emotion for controlling others is not hate or love, it is fear.
After enough time, the voice of fear no longer needs to come from outside. It moves in. It becomes part of your thinking, part of your rhythm, part of your identity. You begin to hear it before you speak, before you act, before you question. That voice does not yell. It only whispers. Are you sure you want to do that? You pause before saying what you believe, not because anyone stopped you, but because something inside tells you it is safer to remain quiet. You hesitate before asking the question that matters, not because it is forbidden, but because it might make people uncomfortable. And in that small moment of silence, fear completes its task. This voice is not random. It is built over years, shaped by experiences that linked honesty with punishment, difference with exclusion, and expression with risk. You were not born afraid to speak. You learned it. The pattern begins early. A child expresses emotion and is told to calm down. A teenager questions authority and is told to stop being difficult. An adult challenges a rule and is called disrespectful. These responses are repeated just enough to form a connection. Obedience becomes survival. Eventually, the external voice is no longer needed. You begin to correct yourself. You begin to shrink your own ideas. You begin to watch your own behavior, not for wisdom, but for safety. That safety, however, is not peace. It is a habit, a defense against imagined consequences. Cognitive dissonance grows quietly here. You believe in freedom, but you behave in ways that protect your image. You believe in truth, but you filter your words to avoid disruption. That tension creates a quiet fatigue, a sense that you are living behind glass, always seen, never safe. When obedience becomes your instinct, you stop noticing how often you compromise. You explain your behavior to yourself in kind words. I just want to be polite. I do not want to cause trouble. It is not worth the fight. But these are not reasons. They are justification. This internal submission is the final layer of fear appeal. It is efficient, quiet, and invisible. It does not need authority figures. It does not need rules. It only needs the belief that stepping outside the line is too risky. When you hear that voice inside, the one that urges you to stay small, to stay silent, to stay agreeable, recognize it, not as your wisdom, but as your training. That voice is not your conscience, it is your conditioning. To unlearn fear, you must first notice it, not in the loud moments, but in the small choices. The hesitation before asking a question, the discomfort in disagreeing, the habit of smiling when you feel otherwise. It is not rebellion to hear yourself clearly, it is recovery. There is a moment, usually quiet, when something begins to shift. You pause, not out of fear, but out of recognition. You start to see the patterns you once followed, without question, and for the first time, you understand that fear has shaped more than your decisions. It has shaped your identity. That moment is not loud. It does not arrive with a sudden realization. It unfolds slowly, like waking from a dream. You begin to notice your own reactions, the way you nod when you disagree, the way you avoid confirmation, even when it matters, the way you hide parts of yourself, because showing them feels dangerous. This is the beginning of awareness, not of rebellion, but of observation. It is not about breaking rules.
It is about understanding why you follow them, and whether those reasons belong to you. You have been taught that fear is part of life, that it helps you navigate the world, stay protected, avoid danger. But fear appeal is not the same as instinct. It is not the same as survival. It is manipulation, and it works by distorting your understanding of what is safe and what is real. When you begin to see it for what it is, the spell begins to break. You no longer respond to fear without question. You start to ask, who gave this fear its authority? Who decided this reaction is necessary? Who benefits when I remain silent? These questions do not erase fear, but they give you space. Space to breathe, to think, to pause before you obey. That space is where your autonomy begins to return. Many who have walked this path describe it the same way. They did not change overnight. They simply started noticing when their shoulders tensed, when their voice softened unnecessarily, when their decisions served someone else's comfort, not their own truth. They wrote things down. They spoke small truths aloud. They stayed still when their body wanted to shrink. And in those small acts, they stepped outside the spell. You can do the same. Choose one moment from your life, recent or distant, where you responded from fear rather than choice. Sit with it. Do not judge it. Write it down. Say it aloud to yourself. Let it become visible. You are not alone in this. The world is full of people who have obeyed quietly for years. Many of them have never questioned it. Some have begun to, and a few have started to speak. You may feel resistance, even now, a hesitation to look too closely. That is normal. Fear defends itself well, but it cannot survive full awareness. This is not about blaming others. It is about reclaiming the space inside your own mind, the space where your choices were taken from you, disguised as safety. Once that space returns to you, even in fragments, fear begins to lose its grip. Obedience is often seen as a virtue. You were praised for following directions, for staying quiet, for doing what was expected without hesitation. But what is rarely discussed is the price you paid for that praise. Every time you obeyed out of fear, something inside you adjusted, a boundary shifted, a voice softened, a question disappeared. Over time, these adjustments left a mark, and that mark became a shape, the shape of someone smaller than they truly are. The cost of fear-based obedience is not always visible. It appears slowly. You begin to feel anxious when you have to make choices. You doubt yourself in moments where clarity should exist. You carry guilt when you consider saying no, even when no is the honest answer. These are not personality flaws. They are symptoms, evidence of a system that rewarded you for compliance and punished you for authenticity. You begin to notice this cost in relationships. You say yes when you want to say no, just to avoid conflict. You keep opinions to yourself, just to preserve harmony. You tell half-truths, not because you enjoy deception, but because honesty has been framed as a risk. Philosophers have wrestled with this dynamic for centuries. Søren Kierkegaard wrote of despair as a condition not caused by pain, but by the abandonment of one's true self. When fear forces you to trade authenticity for acceptance, that trade begins to eat at you from the inside. Psychologist Erich Fromm described something similar. He explained how modern individuals often escape from freedom, choosing obedience to authority because it feels safer. But that safety, he warned, is an illusion. It creates internal conflict, a sense that your life is not truly yours. You may live in comfort, you may function well, but if your comfort depends on silence, and your function depends on fear, you are not free, you are managed. The longer you live this way, the harder it becomes to recognize the cost. Your emotional reactions dull, your curiosity fades, your identity becomes a set of behaviors shaped by others, defended by fear. You begin to see life through a narrow lens. Every risk feels amplified, every disagreement feels dangerous, every decision feels like it must pass through the filter of approval. That filter is not neutral. It was built by years of conditioning, reinforced by every moment you were told to be quiet, polite, and good. And yet, underneath that filter, something remains. A part of you that remembers what it felt like to speak without fear. A part that aches when you obey out of habit. A part that knows you were meant for more than avoidance. This cost is not just personal, it is collective. A society built on fearful obedience becomes fragile. People stop thinking critically. They stop challenging systems. They stop protecting what matters, not because they do not care, but because fear has convinced them that caring too loudly is dangerous. You were told that obedience makes you good, but goodness that depends on fear is not stable, it is brittle, and when enough pressure is applied, it breaks. Now that you have walked through the layers, you may begin to feel something unusual. Not anger, not clarity, but stillness. A pause between what you were taught and what you have now seen. That space is where awareness begins to grow. You have not been weak, you have been trained. You have not been blind, you have been conditioned to look away. Every time you obeyed without questioning, you were told it was the right thing to do. That message was repeated so often, it became part of your moral compass. But that compass was not built for truth. It was built for control. You were led to believe that fear is your ally, that it helps you make smart decisions, that it protects you from mistakes. But fear is not always a guide. Sometimes it is a leash, and sometimes it is a cage. You no longer need to believe that fear equals safety. You no longer need to accept that obedience is the same as maturity. That story is complete. What you do with it now is your choice. Not everyone will understand what you are beginning to see. Some will feel the same discomfort and turn away. Others will sense the shift and lean in. You are not alone in this reflection. Many are beginning to feel it. A slow unraveling of the quiet systems that shape their thoughts, their habits, their identities. The truth is not final. It is not a sentence or a conclusion. It is a lens. Through it, you will begin to see more clearly. Not everything, but enough to move with intent, instead of reflex. Do not try to erase fear completely. That is not the goal. Instead, meet it with awareness. See it for what it is. A signal, a suggestion, a memory, not a command. This journey will not end here. It will continue in the way you speak, in the choices you reconsider, in the silence you choose to break. And in that process, something will return to you. Not something new, but something you forgot. The voice that once asked why. If this video has helped you see even a small part of that voice again, speak to it. Write something below. Not a reaction, but a reflection. A moment when fear controlled your path, and you stepped back just enough to notice it. If this message feels important, share it with someone who may need to feel the same quiet shift. Let them find their own moment of stillness. And if you wish to continue walking through this lens, subscribe and stay close. There is more to see, more to uncover, more hidden truths that still shape the world you move through every day. We will speak again, but for now, carry this with you, not as a warning, but as an invitation. You do not have to obey the voice that was never truly yours.